Well, I'm joined now by Ibrahim Kalin, Special Advisor to President Erdogan and spokesperson for the President. Pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Nice to see you.
So, Operation Peace Spring, did you get what you wanted out of it?
Well, mostly we made serious progress over the last 7-8 days in terms of reaching our goals. And the operation had two main goals. One is to clear our border from all terrorist elements, including PYD, YPG, Daesh or related terrorist organization. And the second one is to create spaces for the refugees to go back to. We have made significant progress for the first part of this operation where, in fact, we have successfully pushed the terrorist elements further down. But now we are in the first phase of this agreement that we have reached with the Americans, where we paused the operation to allow them to go south, leave this safe zone area. So once that is complete, we will halt the operation. And then, of course, it will take some time to clear that area, secure all the residential areas, surrounding areas. And then hopefully we will start the work for the refugees to go back to. So in terms of the first phase of the operation, I think a lot has been achieved.
Okay, so focusing on that first phase and the agreement to get to that point, how did the Americans convince the Turkish side that they could disarm the YPG and convince the YPG to push back, especially since the YPG feels betrayed by Trump and the Americans?
Well, they've supported an armed YPG for the last 2-3 years. This is a policy from the Obama period. And unfortunately, the Trump administration took over this policy. It's really ironic because President Trump criticizes everything that Obama did and in fact tries to turn down everything he accomplished, except on this issue, where they decided to continue to arm PYD, YPG in the name of fighting Daesh. But I think now more and more people in the U.S., including general public, analysts, policymakers, politicians and others, are beginning to realize that the United States is actually arming a Marxist organization in Syria. And it's really a political scandal, irony, even tragedy for the United States to do that. But they've said all along that they have leverage over YPG. And then we said, okay, use that leverage, get them out of the safe zone area, which includes the areas between Ras Al Ain and Tel Abyad, these two major cities, which are predominantly Arab, by the way. PYD, YPG should not have been there in the first place at all, but they went in thanks to American support, military support, training, political and other areas. Now they're leaving, they're in the process of leaving, and so we took the Americans for their word, obviously, and I know they're making an effort. As of today, as we speak right now, we reached the agreement a day and a half ago, and we have established a mechanism whereby our military is in touch with the U.S. military. We have no contact with the YPG, and we will not, of course. We will not be dealing with terrorists other than in the way they understand, meaning that if they attack us, if they attack our soldiers and other Syrian National Army, we will retaliate. But other than that, we have an agreement with the Americans and a mechanism in place now to get them out of the safe zone area.
It's been a roller coaster relationship with the United States over the past few years, but especially the past few days or weeks, right? I want to start with October the 9th, the letter. Don't be a tough guy, don't be a fool, call me later. I mean, a lot of us thought it was a parody when we saw it initially. We couldn't understand that this might be real. This might be a serious diplomatic letter to another head of state. Sanctions, criticism. No, actually, I support the Turkish position. The YPG is probably worse than, or PKK is worse than ISIS. Up, down, all around. Pence and Pompeo come to Turkey. Very serious tone, and then an agreement. How would you characterize the past couple of weeks?
Well, it's a lot of diplomacy, has all the, I guess, characteristics of the Trump era. With all due respect, President Trump has his own style in politics, in diplomacy, in economy, in running his affairs, in running the White House. It's no secret. Everybody knows that, whether you agree with it or not, you applaud it, support it, or reject it, deny it. As far as domestic American political scene is concerned, of course, it's not for me to comment on that, but as far as Turkish-US relations are concerned, we take this relationship seriously. When we received the letter, of course, we were very surprised by the style, and we immediately rejected it. But the content was also as problematic, proposing the idea of negotiating between Turkey and the YPG. Well, it
General
says
Mazloum,
SDF.
elevating him to a general.
It's of course unacceptable for the U.S. to engage a PKK terrorist who's been tried in Turkey, who is on the red list, and there is a arrest warrant for him here in Turkey. But I guess this is something that the American military establishment has presented to President Trump. And that military establishment largely shares the view of the Obama administration in terms of engaging or continuing to engage YPG at a time when the President of the United States has announced not once, not twice, but several times that the Daesh or the Caliphate has been destroyed. If it has been destroyed, the purpose for which YPG has been supported is no longer there. Therefore, that support shall stop. And I think this is what President Trump is trying to do. When he announced that he's pulling out U.S. soldiers out of Syria almost 6-7 months ago, and he said this publicly on Twitter and in his public statements, again, his military and security establishment resisted this, turned things around, and try to convince him that, no, it's not a good idea for the U.S. to leave Syria for other reasons than just fighting Daesh. So a lot of other political elements, I think, have gone into this process, whereby we basically said that, look, our goal is very clear. We value this relationship, but it cannot come at the expense of our own national security. We have to take care of our own national security, just as Americans care about their, say, for example, Mexican border, illegal immigrants or drug cartels, and not to speak of even terrorism. We have to take care of our own border, and we have this imminent danger of terrorism, and it's been there for not just weeks, for months, for years now. What is worse is that every support that has been given to PYD-YPG has in fact ended up empowering and encouraging PKK in other areas, whether in Turkey or in Iraq or in Iran or other places. Therefore, we've said all along that we cannot let this process just go on like this. We had a Manbij roadmap, which our foreign minister announced with the U.S. Secretary of State more than a year ago. It's been almost a year and a half, and it was supposed to be done in 90 days. What was the Manbij roadmap? The U.S. was going to take out YPG terrorists out of Manbij, and the Manbij area, including the city, will be controlled and maintained and managed by U.S. Turkish security forces, but it will be managed by the local people. That was the idea. That agreement was never materialized. Right. When we had the second round of talks with the Americans about the safe zone, when they said, okay, we support the idea of safe zone, then after weeks of work and negotiations and talks, and including joint patrols, I mean, in fairness to them, it happened from the air, on the ground, right, and other places. But then again, we got the sense that this is becoming Manbij 2.0. Mm-hmm. This cannot go on like this, because while we are having this safe zone mechanism right to our south, YPG was still getting more weapons, more ammunition, more training, and they were building up their military force. And we said, look, this cannot go on like this. So that's when our president decided to go with the operation. And in fact, he called President Trump on October the 6th and told him that we've tried our best to do this with you, that is, create the safe zone. And he explained his plan for the safe zone at the UN General Assembly. He showed the map. So it's no secret. He shared it with about 18, 19 heads of states that he met in New York during the UN General Assembly. And he said, look, we have to create the safe zone so that we can have the refugees to go back to their homes. Mm-hmm. So it's no secret that, you know, we had this map and plan clearly outlined and shared with all the allies. When we realized that we cannot do this with Americans, with YPG being there, then we said, okay, we'll have to do it ourselves.
Right. All negotiations, carrot and stick, give and take, splitting the difference, whatever you want to call it, diplomacy, right? Sanctions are real. They have been imposed. There's the threat of more sanctions. And there's also a very direct, literal threat from the most powerful man in the world to quote, destroy the Turkish economy. He's done it on Twitter, he's done it live on TV, he's done it in the letter as well. How seriously does President Erdogan take that threat of Donald Trump to destroy the Turkish economy?
First of all, the language of threat is not the way to talk to Turkey, to deal with Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally, it's a strong country with 82 million people. And if you look at just this latest round of events in Turkey, this Peace Spring operation, the polls have shown very clearly to this day, from the beginning of the operation on October 9th to this day, about 90–95% of the Turkish public is supporting this peace operation. So the support is across the political spectrum, by the way, not just the government or the MHP, the Nationalist Party, but the CHP and other political parties have lent their support behind this operation and support the president as the commander-in-chief. So there is this huge popular support for this. Secondly, it's a matter of national security for us. It's not a tactical issue. It's not an economic issue. It's not a political issue. It's a matter of vital national security. So when you have an issue like this at hand, no threats, no sanctions, no other measures can stop Turkish people, the Turkish government, from taking care of its own security. The sanctions, or this type of sanctions, have been imposed before. They've been talked about a lot at the Congress, at the White House, and other places. Some other European countries have imposed arms sales sanctions. They stopped selling arms to Turkey. We have seen this before. In fact, if you look at our recent history, we have seen this in the Cyprus operation in 1974. We have seen this in other counterterrorism operations in the past. What happened? Turkey grew stronger out of all this. But we would like to work with our allies and partners. We do not want to confront them. We do not want to have any kind of tension between Turkey and NATO allies and other allies. But if they push us to the edge and say you have no choice but to accept our terms, then of course we say no, we have other choices. And this is what our president has made clear all along. Turkey is not without options. We do not see foreign policy as a zero-sum game. Our engagement in the Middle East doesn't have to come at the expense of having good relations with European countries. Our being a NATO ally doesn't have to come at the expense of having good relations, say, with African nations, Middle Eastern countries, or Asian nations. We don't see foreign policy like that. But unfortunately, as a remnant of the Cold War period, Cold War mentality, some people still think that if you belong to a certain alliance, then you're boxed in there. You cannot have any other engagements. When you look at the nature of politics globally today, every country in the world actually engages in other areas of the world, in other countries, in other regions, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other places, and no one criticizes them. No one criticizes France, for example, or the UK for engaging in Middle Eastern politics, or if in Africa, in other places. When Turkey does that, and Turkey does it, by the way, with the perspective of a win-win situation for everyone, we are then criticized for moving away from the West, leaving the Western alliance, betraying NATO, and all of that. No, actually, it is our Western allies that have betrayed Turkey in its fight against terrorism.
Is it a betrayal when Emmanuel Macron says Turkey's, in his words, invasion of northern Syria are a madness or an insanity? That's the French translation. He called it insane and a madness. Do you feel betrayed?
Well, we are not interested in occupying any part of any country, whether Syria, Iraq, or anywhere else. They know very well that we're fighting against PKK. The reason they are upset, I guess, their proxy forces on the ground in Syria have been dealt a major blow. And that changes a lot of geopolitical dynamics in the region. The Peace Spring operation actually undermined many of these geopolitical plans and games and tricks that we have seen happening before our eyes. So our president said, look, if you don't pay attention to Turkey's legitimate security concerns and our understanding of what kind of a regional order should be established so that it will be a win-win situation for everyone, not just for Turkey, but for Syrians, for Iraqis, for all the other countries, and for the refugees, which in turn, of course, affect immediately or directly the Europeans themselves, if you don't pay attention to all these concerns that we've been raising for so long, then we will take our own steps. We will inform you, we will try to work with you, but just as you are entitled to go after your own national security, Turkey is also entitled to protect its national interest, borders, and fight against terrorism. So this kind of criticism might be suitable for domestic political consumption, but it has no effect on how we make our policies and implement them.
I want to put Macron aside for a second and read to you something that I found on Amnesty's website this morning. And I just want to focus a little bit on the fighting before we talk about the refugees. Amnesty putting out a very strong statement this morning on their website. They said, are you aware of it? Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Damning evidence of war crimes and other violations by Turkish forces and their allies. Summary killings, indiscriminate attacks in residential areas, including attacks on a home, a bakery, and a school carried out by Turkey and allied Syrian armed groups. The Turkish military offensive has wreaked havoc on the lives of Syrian civilians who once again have been forced to flee their homes and are living in constant fear of indiscriminate bombardment, abductions, and summary killings. That's from Kumi Naidu, the Secretary General of Amnesty. Your response to Amnesty?
Well, first of all, if there have been any violations, summary executions, harming of civilians, they will be investigated. We do not tolerate this kind of thing. There has never been an indiscriminate shelling or bombing of civilians. We have avoided civilian areas from the day one of this operation until we halted it or we paused it just a few days ago. Turkey has done more for the Syrian people than any other country in the world over the last 7-8 years. We host almost 4 million refugees in Turkey. Why should we be causing more harm or agony or tragedy, humanitarian crisis in Syria? We have protected more civilians, not just in Turkey by hosting the refugees here, but also across the border. In fact, we are also taking care of about 3 million Syrian refugees in the areas between Jarablus, just west of Euphrates, all the way to Idlib. Just in Idlib itself, you have about 2.5, close to 3 million people, most of whom actually depend on aid coming from Turkey. So actually, we are taking care of about 7 million, 7.5 million Syrian refugees. That's almost 1/3 of Syria's entire population. We are doing more for them than any other country, the most powerful and wealthiest nations of the world, when they in fact turn a blind eye to the Syrian crisis and the suffering of the refugees. We are the ones who are protecting them. So this kind of allegations that is causing immense humanitarian crisis, etc., you have to see this within the larger context of what's happening there. As I said, if there are cases of killing and other unlawful acts, even within the limits of the international law of war, they will be investigated. We do not tolerate that kind of thing. But just look at what PKK, PYD has been doing in Syria. As I was walking in here, actually, I was just sent the pictures of the hospital in Tel Abyad, evacuated by YPG. It's been completely destroyed. They have actually damaged the equipment. This is medical equipment that was supposed to be used for the local people there, and they stole some of them. I hope they will report about this as well. And I know Amnesty International has reported about the killings, the summary executions, and other war crimes of PYD, YPG in Tel Abyad, in Rasul Ain, and other places over the last 2-3 years. And I hope the world media will pay attention to this as well. They have not reported extensively about this, war crimes by PYD, YPG, because it goes against the established narrative over the last couple of years that PYD, YPG is the most effective force against Daesh. They represent hope for democracy in the Middle East, etc. Can you imagine that? It's a Marxist-Leninist organization, a terrorist organization, claiming to be hope for democracy in the Middle East. They are the ones who changed the demographic structure and balance in most of northeast Syria. We are not interested in changing the demographics there. When they entered Arab towns, they forced people to flee and go to other places forcibly. Why? Because they had the weapons and the support of the Americans to do this. They had no legal right, no legal basis to do this. But now they, as actually by until last week, they controlled almost 1/3 of Syria. On what basis? With which legal ground? They've done that. No one has asked this question. It was all whitewashed in the name of fighting Daesh.
Right.
And at a time when, more than a year ago, the Americans themselves had announced that Daesh has been destroyed, and they still kept receiving more weapons. And then you ask why? What is this for? Is this a preparation for something else? They've become mercenaries. PYD, YPG have become mercenaries in Syria. They are proxy forces of other countries. So there is a greater geopolitical game that is being played out there. But we cannot let that happen anymore to harm our people, turn our border into a corridor of terrorism, and cannot let Syria be divided like this, creating some kind of a state structure when, in fact, we talk about Syria's territorial integrity and political unity within the UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We cannot let that happen, whether it's PKK or it's another group. It doesn't matter. If another group from among the Syrian opposition came out tomorrow and said, we are going to create our own little autonomous region, we will divide Syria, etc., and we will oppress, say, the Kurds or the Yazidis or the Christians, we will react in exactly the same way as we did vis-a-vis the PKK. So this is not a fight against the Kurds at all. Kurds are our brothers and sisters. We've lived in this geography for more than 1,000 years. So no one from outside can teach us how to live together with the Kurds. I think they should keep their lessons for themselves, and they should concentrate on their own domestic issues, how to deal with multiculturalism, how to take care of minorities in their own countries. We know how to live with our own people, whether Kurds or Christians, Armenians, Jews, and other people. We've lived in peace, largely in peace, for more than 1,000 years with these people, and we will continue to live with them in this part of the world. They should not interfere. They should not support the terrorist elements here, and they should not justify terrorism in the name of fighting another terrorist organization.
I want to ask you about Phase B and your best intentions then to get refugees to go back home. The most immediate question that comes to mind when you see the pieces on the chessboard moving with Assad's forces coming in, the regime, the Russians, you think, well, okay, there are more than 3 million Syrian refugees here. How are you going to convince them to go back to a territory where Assad is back? The very person who barrel bombed them, who tortured them, who used chemical weapons against them. Hey, we're going to send you home, back into the arms of Bashar al-Assad. Is that the plan?
Returning the refugees is based on this fundamental principle, which says that the refugees will go back safely and voluntarily and in a dignified way. We're not going to force anybody, we've never forced anybody to go back to Syria, and we will not force them to go anywhere they don't want to go. When we cleared the Jarablus al-Bab area from the Daesh terrorists with our Euphrates Shield operation about 2 years ago, and then when we cleared Afrin with the Olive Branch operation from most of the PYD, YPG elements, they still remain in Tel Rifat, close to Afrin, but Afrin itself has been mostly cleared of these people. More than 350,000 Syrian refugees returned. They don't want to return to areas under regime control or under PYD, YPG control for the reasons you just explained. So we are not going to force them. So Phase B is, in fact, talking to the Russians. That's why our president has also said over the last couple of days, in fact, when he had negotiations with the Americans, with Vice President, he also told them that his meeting on Tuesday with President Putin is significant. It's important in many ways, because now we are going to have to talk about these other areas evacuated by the Americans, where some regime forces are present. So we want to make sure that the map that our president showed at the UN General Assembly will be one unified area for the refugees as a safe zone. We want to do it, part of it with the Americans. The Tel Abyad-Rasulan area is now mostly under control, and we would like to work with the US and other international members of the community, international community, But the rest, of course, we will have to talk with the Russians to make sure that this remains as a safe zone for the refugees to go back to. Another important element there, of course, is the removal of YPG elements from these areas. So if the YPG replaces the American flag with Russian flag, it's no good for us either. We made it clear to our Russian colleagues. They know our sensitivity and red lines on this issue very well. I had the Russian delegation the other day in Ankara, and we had discussions about this. Now we are preparing for the meeting on Tuesday in Sochi, where our president will discuss these issues with President Putin. And I believe we have a common understanding as to how we can manage this area. It's in the common interest of all the actors involved to keep this area clear from YPG regime and others, so that the refugees can feel safe and can go back voluntarily in a dignified way. And that's where the international community needs to come in. If they really care about the refugee crisis, which I doubt actually, because we've seen their record over the last 2-3 years, they should support Turkey in this effort. This is not for political gain. This is not expanding Turkish control over Syrian territories. This is not an exercise in occupying another country, changing demographics. No, we want to help almost the 4 million refugees who live in Turkey to go back to their towns and cities, have a normal life, just like any other human being, and stop this tragedy of seeing Syrian refugees dying in the cold waters of the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea. It's really the failure of the international community that the Syrian people had to suffer this much for this long. We are trying to find ways to end the suffering. And the world community should help Turkey in this effort, rather than supporting the terrorists or making plans for dividing Syria or stoking more violence, strife, division in the region.
I want to circle back to the beginning, just as we end here, and talk about the fight against the PKK and YPG. I mean, even the Americans are stating quite clearly, yes, of course, the YPG is linked to the PKK, which they were being a little bit diplomatic about it in the past, when tactically they were using them to fight Daesh. It's a problem to the Turkish state. It has been for a long, long time. A listed terror group, an armed insurgency. You are intent on smashing them across the border in Syria right now, the YPG. You don't want them on the border. Is there a fear that the PKK will now be resorting to urban violence, like TAK and others within major cities here, because it's been quiet on that front for about 3 years? Is that factored into the thinking now? We're fighting them there in Syria. Perhaps we've got to keep a close eye within the borders of Turkey right now.
Well, we are actually, you make an important point here. That shows actually the true nature of the PKK. They claim in Syria that they're fighting for their land, against Daesh terrorists, etc. We all know that. It's just a pretext for PKK to find a niche or a place for itself in Syria at a time when we really almost crushed them in Turkey. Unfortunately, the decision by the Obama administration to arm PYD-YPG in Syria came at a time when PKK had no breathing ground left in Turkey. And we were really going very hard after them in Iraq. Syria, thanks to this decision by the Obama administration to arm them, suddenly became their new safe haven, their training grounds. And they, at a time when we're talking about disarming the PKK, realize that they have an opportunity in Syria. They can use the fight against Daesh, present themselves as this pro-Western, modern, democracy-loving, civilized, fighters against the barbarians of the Middle Ages, etc. And the American press and the Western media largely just, jumped on the bandwagon and said, "Oh, these are beautiful fighters, beautiful human beings, etc." This is like claiming the neo-Nazis and the KKK in America. They're just beautiful, have nothing to do with terrorism, etc. Who will buy that? Who can believe that in Turkey or in the region, anyone who knows anything about this. The Americans made this mistake in the past when they supported different so-called jihadi groups against communists in guerrilla operations in Latin America, in Afghanistan, in the Middle East and other places. And unfortunately, they ended up paying a bigger price for this. So that should stop. Of course, we are very vigilant against the PKK terrorism threat. It's still there. We are fighting against them viciously. We are taking every measure to make sure that our citizens are not harmed. They do not carry out any attacks in Turkey. They do not infiltrate Turkey from the Syrian or Iraqi border. That's why, while we continue this operation, conduct this operation, we also continue to watch the Turkish-Iraqi border, Turkish-Iranian border very closely, because they launch attacks, from those countries as well. The PKK remains in the Kandil Mountains, but we are determined to go after them. They have some presence in Sinjar, again, near the Iraqi-Syrian border. We are determined to go after them, to neutralize them there as well. So it must be a very clear sign to all of them that Turkey will never allow this kind of terrorist activity on its soil or near its border. But I think the international community should come out very strongly against this terrorist network as well. This mistake of supporting PKK and its branches in Syria, PYD, YPG, in the name of fighting Daesh should come to an end immediately. Then we can fight against terrorism coherently, decisively, all together, because we live in an age where none of us is safe until all of us are safe. No country, single country, can claim immunity from terrorism. And you cannot pick and choose among terrorist networks. This fight must be coherent, cohesive, decisive, but we have to do this all together.
Ibrahim Kalin, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.